Please help me welcome Mel Samples. Mel is a survivor of mental illness, both her own and that of her parents. As an author, her gift is storytelling. But as someone who has been through the trenches with mental illness, she offers more than just a story. She offers honest reflections, raw truth, and genuine emotion. Through her written piece, I Wasn't Other People.
I was 4 years old when I had my first anxiety attack. We were at the mall, my mom and me, and she'd just sat me down at a table in the food court with my lunch while she quickly ran to a nearby stand to get hers. "Stay here where I can see you," she said. "Okay," I mumbled as I climbed up onto my chair. Like the typical preschooler I was, I happily swung my feet back and forth, distracted by everyone who walked by. Humming to myself, I looked around as I waited for my mom. That's when I saw the stranger. He was clearing tables a few feet away, doing his job, minding his own business. I freaked out. My mother, an abused divorcee, was paranoid that my biological father would kidnap me someday. They had been divorced for almost 4 years, and he lived 1,000 miles away, but he was an alcoholic with PTSD, so she didn't trust him, which meant I shouldn't trust him. She warned me to never talk to strangers and to not let them get too close. Well, I didn't know if this guy was my dad, but I wasn't taking any chances. I bolted from my chair and flew to my mother's side, tears streaming down my face. Trembling and clinging to her, I finally pointed to the man who was clearing my uneaten lunch from our table. She knew at a glance, of course, that it wasn't him, and comforted me too. But that day set a trend for the next 38 years. 38 years of being afraid, being scared, being sad, and overwhelmed by the slightest thing that probably didn't make other people bat an eye. But I wasn't other people. I was crazy. Of course, when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, kids weren't crazy. They didn't have anxiety attacks. They were undisciplined. Hyper, high-spirited maybe, but not crazy. But my mom's paranoia became my paranoia. I didn't go anywhere without her. I turned down play dates and sleepovers, and I started having panic attacks every morning before school. I missed 9 weeks of 5th grade because I was inconsolable by the time I got to the bus stop. I slept in my mom's bed until I was 13, making her promise not to turn the light out until I was asleep. Then when I was 15, I lost her to cancer. My world crumbled. That's when I moved in with my older brother and his family, grieving for my mother, adjusting to new rules, a new life, and learning how to cope with this deep-seated anxiety I'd felt. I reached a breaking point. Suicide had to be the answer to fixing the pain I felt. I remember practicing one time. I took a safety pin and dragged it up and down the brightest blue vein at my wrist. It left a bloody scratch, but since it was just a practice run, I didn't poke any deeper. I just needed to know how it felt and what it would take. I realized I didn't have what it took. So that's when I learned how to put on masks to get through life. I joined speech, theater, choir, and cheerleading, and I played all my roles like an Oscar-winning actress, saving my crying for the dark before I went to bed at night. Nobody, and I mean nobody, knew how sad and lonely I felt. At the encouragement of a hospice counselor, I joined a support group for kids like me who had dealt with the death or divorce of a parent. Thanks to my new friends, depression and grief finally tapered to a dull ache, and I managed to create some semblance of a normal life. I met a guy my senior year and went on to marry him and have 2 children. That's not to say that I haven't thought about suicide since those early years, though. I have. In one of his fits of rage, my husband nearly drove himself, me, and our unborn son into a partially frozen lagoon. Knowing I had no money to leave him, I thought about suicide. That's when I went to a doctor who officially diagnosed me with depression and prescribed me medication. 6 different prescriptions that year alone, actually. Since medication wasn't working, well, I thought maybe drinking was the answer. I partied 3 nights a week. I was just letting loose, right? Nothing wrong with that. And the sleeping around I started doing? No big deal. Till I caught an STD. Yeah, I had all the answers back then. The mornings after partying, hungover, reality would hit. I lay in bed listening to my babies screaming for their mama to make them breakfast. And all I could think about was what a horrible, selfish person I had become. I never once blamed mental illness, just myself. I thought about suicide then too. When my husband was arrested for embezzlement, he used my poor mental health as a reason for the judge to go easy on him. She needs me, he argued. She and our children need me. The judge obliged out of pity for our family. 10 days later, he hit me with divorce papers, and I was told that he was keeping the kids. I felt devastated. I knew if a judge bought his manipulation once, it was likely it would happen again. I also knew if I didn't have my kids, I had nothing left to live for. It was time to end it this time. I spent days planning. During one of those days, my 3-year-old son crawled onto the couch with me. Wiping my tears, he said, "Why you cry?" Which of course only made me cry harder. But I somehow mustered the courage to pull myself up from the depths that I had slipped. I realized that despite all my fuck-ups, I had managed to do something right. I stood up that day, wiped my tears, and fought for my children, for their lives and mine. My something's right turned 20 and 22 this year. I am remarried to a man with infinite strength, who takes care of me when I don't have the courage to deal with the day. He understands me and knows what I need before I do. A few years ago, we adopted a third child who just turned 21, and together, the 5 of us have built a happy life together, a good life that I'm very proud of. I am still clinically depressed, bipolar actually. I have severe anxiety, PTSD, and mild agoraphobia. I take medication and I meditate, but I still have days when I feel like life would be better for those around me if I wasn't here. I understand that my demons will be around for as long as I am. I just have to remember that even when I don't feel strong enough to slay them, that my family is. My husband is my rock, and my kids are amazing. And without them, I wouldn't be here. They're the reason I'm here tonight sharing my story with you. I love you guys. Thank you.